Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Jim Raley. I'm chair of the Board of County Commissioners here in Garrett County, and I want to welcome you to the second annual State of the Lake meeting. I do want to introduce our staff. DNR and the state will take care of introductions of their staff, but we have Commissioner Gatto with us this evening, Bob Gatto, Commissioner Gregan Crawford, Monty Paganhart, the County Administrator, John Nelson from our Planning and Land Use Division, and Carol Riley, our official timekeeper this evening. When we get to the public comment portion, we will limit the comments to 3 minutes, and that's so we can get through the approximate 25 people, I believe, who have asked. The Secretary is on a schedule this evening and has to be at another commitment. That's why I wanted to start promptly and move forward with this meeting and give you the opportunity then hopefully to ask as many questions or express your views at the end of the meeting. So with that, thank you for being here again, and I'll turn it over to Secretary Griffin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to what we're describing as our second annual State of the Lake report, which is centered primarily on the comprehensive water quality monitoring program that we started in 2009. And of course, that's the focus, but there's a lot of related issues that necessarily come up. We have a PowerPoint that I'm going to use. I'm going to do a little overview and give you some of the bottom line findings over the last year through our monitoring program. Then Bruce Michaels, who heads our Resource Assessment Service, his unit in our department handles the comprehensive monitoring program here as well as for the Chesapeake Bay as a whole, and they do a lot of other things. And then John Grace, who's the head of water appropriations at the Department of the Environment, has some updates for you. And Joe Gill, our Deputy Secretary, wants to talk a little bit about the lake, the sides of the lake, the growth of things on the lake. And then lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about where we're headed from here. I might start off by saying on behalf of Governor O'Malley and Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown, I want to express our regrets at the difficult storm that all Garrett County residents and some in Allegheny experienced, but particularly here in Garrett County. I can tell you that we deployed at the request of the governor 16 of our natural resources police officers who were working on shifts 24/7. We had probably 10 of our sawyers from our forestry unit equipped and trained to do chainsawing, as well as some park personnel. We had another group from our wildlife division. So we had a lot of people up here trying to help Garrett Countyans and the county government contend with the aftermath of the storm. And I know there's still work going on. Senator Edwards had asked the governor to have DNR, quote, cut through a lot of the red tape with roadside tree permits, which I think we did, particularly to help out our municipal governments here. And I just want to say to you that I had a lot of feedback from our field personnel who were up here doing all the heavy lifting, and they were proud and honored to be part of the whole operation up here, that because they feel appropriately very attached to this county and all of you as its residents, and we're happy and honored to help out wherever we could. So I just wanted to leave you with that thought. And the benefit of people pulling together and working together is always, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So in terms of an overview, is that it? That's not much of a... Okay, thanks. I wish I could say I was a fellow here holding that northern pike. Maybe that's on my bucket list, but just to start off, as I mentioned, this is the second annual State of the Lake report. This gentleman is Matt Sell, who's one of our fisheries biologists. This is a record northern pike he caught this year on the lake. It's 43 inches long and 23 pounds. And they're dating it now, aging it, but this may have been roaming around the lake when this young man was in high school. So I imagine some of you like me are very envious of his record catch out of the lake here. Again, I wanted to, next slide, Bruce, go through the overview. These are some bottom line points. First one to remember that's becoming more and more obvious is the lake and the watershed it sits in is a system, which means that it's hard to compartmentalize activities that happen in one part of the lake from affecting others. This is a whole system and it's interconnected. So we need to start thinking more about the watershed as a whole, because if we don't, the maintenance of Deep Creek Lake as a recreational and economic asset, not only to the county but to the state, depends upon the ecological balance in the lake itself. That is, we want to maintain a healthy lake that attracts people to come here to recreate in a variety of ways, from swimming to boating to fishing to everything that's done here. And if we don't, looking ahead, recreational use will be impaired, economic values will drop. The next comment I want to make from our monitoring, bottom line points here, the lake continues to be a healthy reservoir, because that's what it is, an impoundment, meeting federal Clean Water Act standards. I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about where we are. As you may know, last year we were in the midst of phase 1 of a sediment study, and we are working, we did phase 2 as a combination of funds from our department, from county government, thanks to your commissioners, and from the Property Owners Association as well, and we thank them. We don't have a final report on the sediments, but we will have, I think, sometime in January, early February. But from our work to date, it's pretty clear that the sediment buildup is most evident in 5 or 6 coves in the southern end of the lake, and otherwise it's not really much of an issue. Don't ask me for detail on this because it's all being cranked up now, but that's a preliminary general comment that's accurate. As you know, as you may know, as part of the rest of the sediment work we have to do, we're going to have a report out in January, one out in May, and then a final one in July. And the one that will come out around May, Mr. Michaels is going to get into this in more detail. We'll be looking at the whole watershed and sources of sediment and ways that individuals and governments and groups of individuals can help contribute to arresting sediment, et cetera, nutrient flows into the lake. But by next summer in July, the last phase of that sediment study will be to do a thorough analysis of alternatives for dealing with the dredging issues in the coves that are most impacted by sediment buildup, costs, alternatives, ways of disposing of it. Just to put that in your calendars. I'm going to simply say on fish, we had a 10,000 or so fish kill up here 2 summers ago. Most of our biologists and our counterparts in MD attributed to a precipitous drop in temperature, which created more stress with the fish, which led them to be susceptible to bacteria, very much not unlike humans in a way. We seem to have been beyond that and moved beyond that, and abundance and spawning success of our fisheries seems to be good. So the fisheries in general are in good shape. Let me talk briefly here about something John Grace will elaborate on. I think this past summer was I don't know if it was a record, but we had very, very high water temperatures and very low precipitation, and that contributed to even worse situations, particularly in shallower parts of the lake, of lower lake levels. And you may have noticed, if you've checked around the country in terms of what's going on, that many of these large impoundments out in the west and southwest, which are much, much greater than an extent than Deep Creek Lake, been experiencing the same thing, very hot temperatures, very low precipitation, great drops in the reservoirs. They're getting into water rationing and all that. I'm not suggesting we have to do that here, just suggesting here that, that climates are changing, and that I think as we look ahead, it's more likely than not that we're going to start to see trends of hotter summers and less precipitation. Wanted to mention a couple things on where we are with Eurasian water milfoil. As we said last year, we would do a survey this summer. We did that. Bruce will go into the details. We found water milfoil in 86 acres of the lake's surface. It was always growing together with other native species. The increase in invasive species, even things like milfoil, will occur in impoundments because invasive species is a growing issue everywhere. Now, 86 acres for the lake surface as a whole is a little over 2%. And some of the shallower coves, that percentage is higher. It's about 5.6%. We haven't worked out the details, but we plan to do 2 pilots this summer. One selectively using 2,4-D herbicide. We want to monitor the effects of that, obviously, to make sure there's no ill effects. And we're also going to try to figure out a way to do some harvesting of boating channels in some of the shallower coves here to see how that goes. We haven't yet figured out a way to fund that, but we're hopeful working together we can do that. So that's sort of the overall bottom line view. Take-home points, water quality here, the way we measure it under the Clean Water Act is in good shape. If you remember last year, and Bruce will show you the various trophic levels of a lake like this, we are where we want to be. The key thing is we've got to keep it that way. And we are going to be coming within the next, by the end of the summer, with some final work products on sedimentation buildup, particularly in the coves, and what might be done about them. And we're going to try to do some pilots on controlling in appropriate ways, not ways that are ultimately or probably harmful to the lake and everything that lives in it, milfoil. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce Michaels and let him give you a lot of the detail. Thanks for your attention, and we'll be taking notes later as people come up and give us their feedback. Bruce?
Thanks, appreciate it. I also want to take an opportunity to thank the county commissioners and everybody for turning out this evening to hear this presentation on the lake. John obviously hit all the key points, and what I'm going to try to do is now provide a few details about the components. I'm going to talk about 4 components. First will be the water quality. Second will be SAV, submerged aquatic vegetation, and Eurasian water milfoil. Then I'll follow that with some updates on our sediment study, the Deep Creek Lake Phase 2 sediment plan, and then finally I'll talk a little bit about our fisheries component and monitoring program. Our water quality monitoring goals, we are committed to continuing with a long-term comprehensive water quality monitoring program at Deep Creek Lake. The purpose of that is to characterize the existing conditions in the lakes, tributaries, and coves. It helps us establish a baseline to look at change over time. And we understand that all lakes are a changing system, and with a lot of development or potential development over the years, we want to look at the impacts of the lake, and then develop a monitoring or a management plan to help keep the lake in a condition that favors everybody and is good conditions for not only the people that use the lake, but for the habitat, fisheries, and recreation as well. This is a map of our monitoring stations. We actually monitor the main channel plus the tributaries, and we have some stream gauges working with USGS that actually get the runoff coming into the lake. So this is what we've committed to doing. We actually have 4 years of monitoring now, and we'll present those results. Okay. The current monitoring program allows us to evaluate seasonal and spatial variations from a baseline condition. These things change every year depending on the amount of precipitation, temperature, and a lot of other factors. We have a very diverse plant community, SAV, with a wide range of species, which is good. And unfortunately, we also have an invasive species, Eurasian watermill foil. Each year that we have been monitoring, the weather conditions have varied pretty dramatically. In 2009, we had a very cool, moderately dry summer. 2010 was warm and a dry summer, and you'll remember 2010 we had that fish kill. Actually, the June temperatures were the highest that we had recorded at that time. And then we had 2011, which was another very warm but a wet summer, relatively speaking. And then finally, in 2012, extremely hot, hotter than we had in 2010. Plus, it was dry as well. And, of course, that impacts the water level of the lake when you have hot and dry conditions. Okay. Water temperatures in 2012 were the highest that we have recorded during the time period 2009 to 2012. The oxygen levels in the lake are good in the surface waters. Our pH, conductivity, all those nutrients help us support a diverse community. We don't have extremely high nutrient levels that cause algal blooms that we see in other areas of the state on the Chesapeake Bay. We do have algal blooms in the coves and some of their shallow water, but the levels are not as extensive as they are in other areas. This is obviously a concern. We want to continue to monitor and assess this. The lake, MDE, actually did a monitoring plan, a monitoring program back in 2008, looking at a potential TMDL for phosphorus, and the phosphorus levels were not as high that would contribute to a TMDL, and actually the concentrations are more natural. The pH levels were from the surrounding areas, and so they decided not to do a TMDL. A TMDL stands for Total Maximum Daily Load. This is all under the Clean Water Act. We're required to meet fishable, swimmable waters under the Clean Water Act. If they do not meet those fishable, swimmable criteria, then a TMDL is put in place and you are mandated to put in source reductions. We identify what those sources are, and then you have to reduce them. The pH levels are natural pH levels from the surrounding environment, and no matter what you do, wouldn't necessarily bring them down, and they weren't that high to cause a serious problem. When we look at other areas, other lakes, the concentrations are not that high. Other water quality issues. There is a health advisory for to limit the consumption of bass and walleye, large fish, because of elevated mercury levels. This is a statewide concern in most lakes. We are seeing the impacts from coal-fired power plants out in the Midwest that is contributing to this high mercury levels in some of our waters. So it's not necessarily a local problem. Also, pH was considered an issue at one time, still is acid mine drainage, but that's more up in the watershed. Oxygen levels are low in the bottom of the lake, and potentially if you have more algae coming in, that would contribute to even lower oxygen levels. Most of our Most of the lake, though, actually has good oxygen levels. The fish do not go into the very deep waters where the oxygen levels are low. And again, that's more of a naturally occurring issue. Looking at our water quality trends, I actually showed this slide last year. These are levels of the lake. Oligotrophic is basically a very pristine lake with no vegetation, no algae, and really no fish populations. Deep Creek Lake is considered mesotrophic, which has moderate nutrient levels in it. The nutrients are needed to help provide a very healthy ecosystem that has fish, plankton, underwater grasses. And if you look at this, we have comparable data from back in 1970, some earlier years, compared to what we've seen recently, and we're still characterized as mesotrophic, and that's where we want to be. On the other hand, next slide, when you look at specific conductance over that same time period, we are seeing an increase in specific conductance. Okay. Specific conductance is from dissolved salts and fertilizers, septic systems, de-icers, and chemicals. This indicates changes due to development, and we need to continue our monitoring program so we can evaluate this. Even though those levels are going up, they've almost doubled, they're still not considered to have an impact on our living resources, but it is something that we want to continue to monitor, and it is an indication of increased development in the watershed. Okay, I'm now going to talk about aquatic vegetation, underwater grasses. Want you all to know that our SAV is a critical component to a healthy lake system. It helps reduce the nutrients. It helps stabilize the sediments on the bottom. It provides excellent habitat and food for fish and wildlife. So underwater grasses are good. They are something that a good, healthy ecosystem should have to support a good fisheries population. DNR in 2010 established an SAV survey program. We have 6 sites throughout the lake. We actually send divers out to characterize the underwater grasses. We're doing species identification, and part of that has come that we have multiple species, 10 to 12 different species, which shows that, again, you have a diverse, well-developed grass program. Unfortunately, you also have Eurasian water milfoil, which is an invasive species. And in 2012, we went out and did an entire survey of all the lake area, and we're committed to going out and doing this again. That survey, as John indicated, we have 86 acres with some level of Eurasian water milfoil identified in it, and the range is from less than 1/10 of an acre to some areas had up to 5 to 15 acres with Eurasian water milfoil mixed in with other species. John indicated 2.3% of the lake surface has Eurasian water milfoil, and 5.8% or almost 6% of the shallows, we were able to identify Eurasian water milfoil in those areas. Okay, one of the key things though, most of the Eurasian waterfowl, the highest density populations are in the southeastern portion. That said, when we looked at our transects, the things that we've been doing for 3 years, and we have identified Eurasian water milfoil in the transects themselves, the transect data showed that there was no significant difference of Eurasian water milfoil, an increase between 2010 and 11 and 12. That's a good sign, that it's not overwhelming and taking over and pushing out the other species. Secondly, when you look at the surface, you see not just Eurasian water milfoil, but other species, common potamogetons, which are pondweed, and vallisneria, which is wild celery. They occupy almost all of our shallow water habitats, as well as the Eurasian water milfoil. Okay. What are the control options? John mentioned two that we're going to pursue. The most effective, lowest impact on a large scale area would be using the herbicide 2,4-D. Potentially, this would be something that would need repeated applications. And you have to remember, there is no one silver bullet for eradicating Eurasian water milfoil. It's in the system, it's in Deep Creek Lake, and it's going to stay in there unless we were to wipe out everything in the lake and kill all the underwater grasses, and of course that would be, wipe out all the fish as well. The cost of this 2,4-D applications is about $500 to $1,000 per acre. It can be used in a targeted area. We are recommending that we do a pilot study this year, identify an area where it is a problem, where we see it, that it's growing up to the surface, that is impeding recreational uses, and try to treat a small area. We will monitor the impacts of that, make sure that there are no detrimental impacts on a larger area. We wouldn't expect anything, but we would want to make sure that through a monitoring program that we assess any of those impacts. 2,4-D has very low toxicity to most fish. There are obviously concerns about putting any chemical in the water, but this has the most benign effect on anything that we can find. And our staff basically did a thorough evaluation of the whole country and even other parts of the world, looking at what are the control measures. And again, every control measure has a negative impact as well as the positive impact of helping to reduce Eurasian water milfoil. Local control measures include benthic mats. We actually had a program this last year that the Park Service initiated. That went fairly well. There were 6 permits, and the cost on that is anywhere from $300 to $500 per mat, and that includes the cost and the installation. Mechanical harvesting. This is another control option. What it does is you go in there and you actually mow it. When the grasses get up towards the surface, you can actually go in. They have special equipment mounted on a large boat with a barge where they collect the material. It's fairly expensive, anywhere from $8,000 to $10,000, and that's just for a couple days. There's transport costs to get the boats up here. We're going to be working to potentially implement on a small scale to look at what we could do with implementing some type of harvesting. The drawbacks is when you cut it, you have to make sure that you get all the shoots, because Eurasian water milfoil, if you just cut the shoots and they stay in the water, they can drop down and reseed themselves, replant themselves, and come up elsewhere. You also have to be very concerned about the equipment that you bring in, that you don't bring in any other invasive species. So those are things that we would have to pay attention to before we just let somebody come in there. Depends on the amount of SAV, so don't have an estimate right there. But I mean, you can cover a pretty significant area. We estimate you could probably do maybe 4 or 5 coves or whatever, depending on what you wanted to do. If you just wanted to do a channel, that might be something to look at. Other control options that we rejected, herbicides other than 2,4-D, they have impacts to all SAV. The 2,4-D is more specific to Eurasian water milfoil, and other herbicides are less effective in a large-scale setting that could disperse and kill other beneficial species. Biological controls, we looked at those as well. Grass carp are illegal in Maryland. The milfoil weevils have not been approved in Maryland as well. They would be considered an invasive species. They are not indigenous to Maryland, so we would be bringing in another species that we don't know what the unintended consequences of bringing in some other species. It's already been banned in the Chesapeake Bay, and if you brought it into the Deep Creek Lake, you'd have the possibility of it expanding elsewhere. It's also,
Goes the other way.
if it's been banned there, so why would we put it here? It's very expensive. Milfoil is very the milfoil weevils are very expensive, like $1,000 per acre. The efficiency of something like that in Deep Creek Lake hasn't been shown. In other reasons, the milfoil is very slow to take over, and the weevils are actually a favorite food of sunfish. We have a lot of sunfish in Deep Creek Lake, and so potentially you would be providing a very expensive appetizer for our sunfish. Okay. Going forward for the upcoming year, we're going to look at, again, continue with our SAV surveys at the 6 locations. We do that 3 times a year. We're going to do our targeted Eurasian water milfoil assessment again. That is scheduled for June of 2013. And then we're going to look at the implementing the pilot control actions that we've talked about. The proposed evaluation or targeted the proposed projects to evaluate the effectiveness of our pilot projects for Eurasian water milfoil, again, will be the herbicide 2,4-D and harvesting in limited areas. Okay, I'm now going to talk about the Phase 2 sediment plan. And first of all, I want to thank, there was a group of individuals that gave us some insights and provided input to the Phase 2 plan. Morgan France, who was here, and others. We certainly appreciate their information. We've completed all the field work associated with the Phase 2 plan. We had a team out here from our Maryland Geological Survey that went to work in April. Conditions weren't the best. It was cold and snowy, but they were able to complete their work. They did the sub-bottom seismic surveys and their bathymetry, which is the bottom mapping, looking at the depths of the water. We did a complete side scan sonar imagery of the lake that allows you to go down through the sediment, see how deep it is to all the way to where the original bottom was. All this information was GPS referenced to the shoreline. We did videos. We compared it to historical bottom data. May through September, Maryland Geological Survey did all the processing, the quality control, quality assurance with the data. And then October, we sent, MGS came back out here and basically collected 42 cores throughout the lake that actually allows us to take those cores and analyze them for potential contaminants to see how much material has been deposited. And finally, we have our alternatives analysis that John talked about. Those are actually, contracts have actually gone out. We're waiting for the Board of Public Works to approve it before they go out to bid. This is a map of the bathymetry and seismic work, shows the depth of our water, where our shallow waters are and our deeper waters. And then the next slide is where we collected the 42 sediment cores throughout the lake. The core lengths range from 0, which was when we hit rock, all the way down to 7 feet in length that we were able to go down in the sediment, which is actually reaching through the bottom of the original soils. The average length of the core was about 3 feet. Again, we took those cores, we're working on them in the lab. The good news is that we haven't found any toxics, contaminants in any of the sediments that we've looked at. which means if, when you're doing dredging, that it's much easier to dispose of the material. You don't have to take special precautions to dispose of and handle potential contaminants. So it's good news that there's no contaminants in the sediments that we've found so far. Future plans for the sediment work, we're going to complete all the analysis of the sediment cores that we have. And as a matter of fact, DNR, we decided to go out and send a subset of these cores to do some carbon dating so we can actually determine when the greatest amount of sediment came in. You're looking at basically 87 years of sedimentation, and some of those sediments in some of the coves look about 20 inches. In 4 or 5 of the coves, we have 20-plus inches of sediment. 20-plus inches over 87 years is less than 1/4 of an inch a year. We want to try to determine if we can go back and look at the historical carbon dating and find out, did the majority of it come during one specific time? And it'll give us more information to help make decisions on how we address the management of the sediments. Contractors, again, talked about the doing a sediment reduction plan. You cannot take sediment and remove it for a dredging problem without first addressing how it is getting into the lake and keeping it from coming in. You're not going to dredge and then wait 20 years and then dredge again. You need to keep the sediment. So part of it, one of the contractors will look at a sediment reduction plan and share that information to local governments in the state. And then they'll also develop that alternatives analysis. Should they decide that dredging would be an option, or what would be the option? What are the costs associated with it? What are the methods? And then what are the impacts? I mean, if you do dredging, it takes time. You can't do boating activity right around where you're doing the dredging, so those are the things that they'll actually look at. Okay. Finally, the last thing I'm going to talk about is fisheries. Unfortunately, Al Klotz is our resident fisheries biologist, couldn't be here. He was here last year, did an awesome job. Bottom line is the fisheries around Deep Creek Lake are really, really good. You all remember that in 2010, we had that fish kill of about 10,000 fish, mainly yellow perch, walleye, and smallmouth bass. We did a survey in the spring, a walleye survey. Walleye are the most abundant game fish species in Deep Creek Lake. They have very diverse size and even, over 20 inches long. The 2012 walleye abundance value was one of the highest recorded to date at Deep Creek Lake. We also, in the spring, we conducted a corrective stocking of 10,000 largemouth bass fingerlings, and this was in response to the the fish kill, and we distributed those in several locations of the lake. We also, in the summer of 2012, they conducted seining surveys to monitor the reproductive success of largemouth, smallmouth, yellow perch, and they were all rated, again, largemouth was rated good, and it was excellent for smallmouth and yellow perch. DNR Fisheries obtained the length and weight of some of the angler catch in the tournaments they had at Deep Creek Lake. The Fisheries Service is still working on the analyzing data, but the initial information from the anglers appears that the fishing has improved since the 2010. And finally, the fisheries people were scheduled to go out to do a total comprehensive fish population survey, but you all had a little bit of snow, so it was postponed, but they're going to try to get out there and do that. I'm now going to introduce John Grace from MDE, and he's going to talk about the water levels, and appreciate everybody's input. Thank you.
I just have a few slides to show some data concerning water this year in Garrett County and on the lake in relationship to Deep Creek Lake. Okay, this first plot is a download from the United States Geological Survey's stream gauge on the Youghiogheny River in Oakland. This is the gauge that has the longest period of record in the area, and it allows us to to compare how any particular year does with the long-term data. The long-term data is shown with this orange line. That represents the median daily values starting from November of 2011 to November of 2012. Like any stream in Maryland, the highest flows are always in the spring, no surprise, and the lowest flows typically occur in late September. This year, we started out pretty good in the fall and winter, and but what happened is right about this time in May, precipitation slowed down, temperatures climbed up higher than normal, and stream flow dropped to about 20% of what it typically would be. So that continued. July was pretty good as far as precip, and we had a little bump up. But after that period, later in August, it again was lower than normal at about 20%. So this was a pretty challenging year as far as amount of water in the system. This is a graph. I've shown this graph before. Last year, if you were here, this is an estimate of how much water, in terms of feet of lake level, entered Deep Creek Lake. And every bar on this graph, every bar on this graph represents a different year from the period of July through September. So it's not a full year. We're just looking at the summer period when the lake is stressed the most, how much water actually comes into the lake. Each year it's divided into two parts. The yellow is the rainfall, and the blue is the estimated inflow into the lake.
How'd you get the inflow?
That's a good question. Bruce showed a slide showing a USGS gauges in the watershed going into the lake, and
What are they not monitoring?
just it's a good question. The Cherry Creek gauge was used to estimate the inflow. So we know the drainage area above that gauge is about, from the top of my head, I think it's about 12 or 13 miles. The total lake drainage area is about 62 miles square. So that gauge is then multiplied. What we had to do to get the full record of 40 years was we had to correlate the gauge at Cherry Creek, because the Cherry Creek gauge only has 4 or 5 years of data. So we had to correlate the Cherry Creek gauge with the Oakland gauge and extend the record, basically simulate what happened during other years. So I just want to point out that 2012, we're here, that's the 8th lowest of these 41 years. Bruce talked about how bad 2010 was, and I'm not telling you anything that you don't know already. 2010 was the second worst. 99 was one of those years where the lake level really suffered, and when we look at the lake level graphs, 99 was worse than any of the other years. Okay, so that's basically corroborates what Bruce was talking about, that it was a relatively dry year. And let's back up one. I just want to show 2011. Here's 2011, which was a wetter year. That represents about 2¼ foot of lake water going into the lake. Okay, thanks. So next slide. So here we are. We've got 3 lines on this graph. Well, actually 5 lines on the graph. This line is the upper rule band that's established in the permit. This is the lower rule band line. And there's 3 different years here. 2012 is this olive drab color. We started out worse this year than any of the last 3 years. And part of the reason for that, if you recall back to that first slide I showed, the flow start going in, the natural flow is much lower in May than it was the long-term years. In addition, this year, at the end of May, right around Memorial Day period or before, Brookfield Power had to do an emergency repair to the valve seats, to the there's two large butterfly valves that allow the water or can shut off the water going to the two generators at the power plant. These valves, just rotate on an axis, but for them to close, they have to close up against something. And what they close up against is the valve seats. And the valve seats were damaged, and there was a potential that a ring would be released and actually get into the generator and destroy the generator. So they had to take emergency action to remove those valve seats. In preparation of doing that, because they were removing the valve seats, they had to lower the lake to provide enough storage should we have a large storm. And that's why we started out the year 2012 lower than we would have liked. They had to drop the lake about a third of a foot. We had a rough year. We hung right around the low rule band for most of the year until we got a little more rain in, looks like, I'm not sure the date there, middle September, maybe? Yeah.
Do you know what the typical outflow is?
When the turbines run, they run
On
at,
an annual basis?
well, yeah, we do have that. We have that data reported to us. I don't know off the top of my head. It's
Does it exceed the inflow?
can't exceed the inflow. But what happens is it exceeds the inflow seasonally. So in the summer, the outflow is obviously exceeding the inflow. But in the fall and winter, the inflow replenishes the storage. So on an annual basis, it's equal, essentially. I lost my train of thought, I'm sorry. I just wanted to point out, I know a lot of you probably were aware, this was a second drawdown that Brookfield instituted this year because of the hurricane coming and their fear of not being able to accommodate the runoff as a result of the predicted snow and rain. I think that's pretty much it for me. Just one last slide. That's my contact information. If you have questions that you're not able to ask me today, or I'm not able to respond to, whatever, please feel free to contact me with any questions about the permit or lake levels. Thank you.
Okay, good evening. My name is Joe Gill. I'm Deputy Secretary at DNR, and
First of
the
all,
numbers remain relatively constant over time. To give you an idea of the size of that, the surface area of the lake is 3,900 acres. So it's about, if every boat were on the lake at the same time, it would be a boat for every acre and a half. There's a trend toward bigger boats on the lake. The recent example being the 26-foot boat with the molded platform. There's a trend with lake owners, property owners asking for longer piers and wider piers to access the lake. And I mention the trend because, as one knows, the lake is not getting any bigger. It is the same size that it has been since it was created. More recent trend is wakeboarding on the lake, and as well as in the Chesapeake Bay. There have been a number of regulatory changes that have been made in response to usage on the lake. Several years ago, there was a limitation placed on the number of power boats to include the number of personal watercraft, in large part in response to the growing number of PWCs on the lake. There's now an additional limitation on wakeboarding of 200 feet from any structure, platform, pier. That has also come about as a result of statewide changes in boating usage. And as I indicated, both of those regulations, relatively new, are in response to the things that are happening on the lake, which brings me to the next slide, and that is the question of exactly how many boats can be on the lake. You know, what is the actual carrying capacity such that when you reach that limitation, you can no longer have any more boats and have the recreational experience that people would like to have when they come to Deep Creek Lake. We do not have that capacity. We have not done carrying capacity in many years. We did do a study in 2003 looking at the tolerance to crowding of various types of recreational activity, like wakeboarding and like PWCs and whatnot. We've also not done a study on the maximum build-out of dock slips, because obviously the more dock slips there are on the lake, the more potential for the number of boats to increase that are on the lake. And I present this information for two reasons. One of which is that any survey of the lake on an annual basis should take a look at the uses and should take a look at the recreational experience that members of the lake are having out at Deep Creek. And secondly, I think that what the data shows is that there's always a danger in a closed system, which is what a lake is, a reservoir is, of the cumulative impacts of use. You know, eventually, as I mentioned before, you reach a place, you reach a stage where you really can't add any more uses to the lake. And what we would like to do is to be in a position, managing the lake going forward, to anticipate what and when and how that will occur, and to manage forward so that we do so in a responsible fashion. I know that Carolyn Matthews, our lake manager, has been talking to many people about these issues, including the Property Owners Association. I also know that Carolyn has, in her time here, done a terrific job, and we are very glad to have her as our lake manager. Thank you all.
Hi, John Griffin again. I just wanted to wrap up, and then we're going to, as Commissioner Raley said, open it up for limited testimony. I think what we'll try to do, what is it, about 5 o'clock, is take notes, and then perhaps I and others will get up at the end and comment on questions or comments made, rather than trying to do it speaker by speaker, or we're going to blow our timing. As we've been saying, and this was a slide from last year, we've got to start to look in a broader context at the lake in the context of the watershed within which it lives, because it is a system. And Bruce, next slide. We had the same slide up here last year about looking at developing a broader watershed management plan for this lake. I want to tell you that we've had, as a department, several ongoing discussions with your county commissioners, and we're working now to develop the details of how we might approach developing a long-term watershed management plan, as well as some other things along the way. And hopefully within the next month or two, we'll have a little more jointly to say about all that. So again, I want to thank all of you for coming. I want to thank our staff. Joe mentioned our great lake manager, Carolyn Matthews, John Wilson, our chief planner. Maybe missing some people, too, of our finest natural resources police officers here with us. I may have missed somebody. I know David Meyerberg is here, who does a great job as the chair of our PRB board. And so we're going to allow the testimony to go forward. And somebody has a gong here, so if you're reaching 3 minutes, you're going to get gonged. Thank you.
All right, just real quick, I want to thank the state for their help during the recent storm. I mean, I think that each of you have seen the crews out there, and I can tell you that Governor O'Malley did a lot more than just come to Garrett County on Thursday. He deployed the resources necessary to get this storm cleaned up, and I think you've seen, the results of that. I did want to recognize Chris Yule from the governor's office, who is our Western Maryland He represents a lot more than Western Maryland now, but Chris gets out here and helps us a lot, and, you know, he's kind of our ear to the governor as well, so I appreciate him being here. What you've seen so far has been achieved through a partnership between several organizations within this county, as well as the county government, as well as the Department of Natural Resources and the Maryland Department of the Environment. We will take this and put in electronic copies. You know, when we get this electronically, we'll put it on our website. I know that Dnr Sotl.com is carrying it live, and they'll have it archived, I believe, so you'd be able to go over there. So if you have friends, DnrSotl.com would be the location to get that. At this point, we have about 22 speakers. 3 minutes each means we'll just get in within that hour time frame and get the secretary out of here by 6 p.m., which he needs to do. One of the other things I'm proud to announce is that Garrett County is working with MDE and the USGS on some water monitoring ourselves. We're committing some money towards water monitoring and fractured rock studies. So I want you to know that we, the commissioners, are committed to trying to improve water quality, to look at long-term improvements in the watershed, and especially with, you know, our commitment to Deep Creek Lake. With that said, if you're a Me Too, there's nothing wrong with entering your name into the record tonight that you say, I agree with the other speakers here. Please, you know, be brief, and let's get to the point of, you know, what it is that we need to share that has not already been covered by DNR and by the Secretary this evening. So with that, first speaker is Dick Bolt. And I believe Carol has a microphone that she's going to be sharing with people. Is that right, Carol?
I have a time.
But how about a microphone? I thought there was a microphone that was, it didn't work. So I'm going to have to ask that you come forward then and use the podium then.
If you called the first 5 people, they will work right after those who would go faster.
Okay. Richard Matlick then.
I didn't want to go first either, let alone up front. My concern is, with Deep Creek Lake, primary concern is not weeds or lake level. I've got to swallow it?
Just move closer to it, Dick.
Am I in now?
There you go.
My concern is lake safety, is DNR park safety, really. But here at this meeting, it's DNR, it's the lake, Deep Creek Lake safety, which comes down to mostly both safety. Now, I've had a PIA and into DNR for a PIA, which is to get freedom of information from DNR for 5 months. Finally, within like the last week, I got some information. It was totally useless, and in fact, it even conflicted with DNR information locally on boat. It gave quantity of accidents, which is of no use to analyze data as other people have to analyze in their areas, as to get mitigations, to come up with mitigations to prevent these accidents rather than just inspection, what DNR does. Now, I'm sure they'll argue with me on that, but that's what's...
Listen, not argue.
So I'm going to refer to my notes here a little bit. I've been working with one of the DNR park managers in safety issues, very little. And I've been trying to work this issue, in fact, of boat safety. I've actually gone and interviewed some of the boat rental agencies. I'm looking for data. Now, data is what we all need, and it's there. I've been stonewalled by DNR headquarters all this time, and now they want me to pay to do what I think is their job, to gather the data that needs to help prevent the accidents. Now, let me go back to my notes here. So I'm asking the secretary if he can get me involved. I've been doing this professionally for 50 years, so I am skilled at it, I think. And that's what I'm asking, to be able to get involved, to get the data, help them get the data so that we can discuss the mitigations. That's close enough to what my notes said here. Thank you.
Okay, after Richard Matlick is Scott Johnson.
All right, I'm going to read this quick since I only have 3 minutes. The subject is the personal impact of the decline of Green Glade Cove. First of all, who am I? I'm a Garrett County, Maryland taxpayer. I estimated I've paid over $200,000 in the last 30 years for Deep Creek Lake front lots, where the buildings were near zero value. I've been a lakefront property owner on Deep Creek Lake, family owned since 1956, sole owner since 1980. My family lives on Deep Creek Lake 4 to 5 months a year. My full-time residence is in LaVale, Maryland. My wife and 3 children grew up on Deep Creek Lake, spending money on water sports equipment, meals, food, entertainment, another sum that probably reaches $100,000 to $200,000 in that period of time. I have owned 4 boats and 5 personal watercrafts that were purchased on Deep Creek Lake, of which I paid sales tax, purchased gasoline, boat tax, etc., all to the sum of $100,000 plus. I paid for dock fees on 2 different permits since 1980, and they now cost $200 each. But most of all, I'm a family that paid dearly to enjoy the wonderful treasures of Deep Creek Lake. Clean water free of vegetation that allowed for my children and now my grandchildren to swim and play in the waters just off my dock. But now it's impossible to swim in the waters off my dock. After mid-July, because of the extreme amount of vegetation and the awful smell from rotting vegetation and goose crap. To boat, water ski, and swim well into September with enough water to float my boat. The last several years, I've pulled my boat and my docks in August due to low water levels, while the whitewater rafters and other water releases continue during dry conditions and the wicket gates continue to leak. To sit on my dock and experience the fresh air and clean waters, water that is now filled with the awful smell from rotting vegetation, floating on the water surface, covered with 1 pound a day per goose crap. And then in August, it turns to mud. Need I go on? I have been attending meetings, paying dues to some organizations such as the Property Owners Association. I attend a policy review board. I go to Garrett County Board of Commissioner meetings. The Policy Review Board tries to understand and recommend changes to the policy that help but are ignored either due to existing regulations that are outdated or wrong altogether. The board needs members at large that are not political and represents the cove owners and the lake user that have seen what the lake can be. I have listened to all kinds of experts from several organizations from the state of Maryland. I've listened to many, many reviews of studies from these same organizations for several years. They present charts that are designed to show what they want to show. You want me to quit?
I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
We can share it later on. You gave us a print copy. We can share it with the secretary.
I was just getting in the meat of it.
Okay.
It's a cash cow.
This is Scott Johnson. Next would be Brian Greenberg.
My name is Scott Johnson. I'm a resident of Deep Creek Lake, live on State Park Road. And I want to compliment the state agencies that are involved in identifying the causes of the problems we're seeing at Deep Creek Lake. Bad news is it might be 90 years too late. Good news is something is being done about it, and I applaud Secretary Griffin for his efforts, and we need to continue to pay attention to it. I think that when cooler heads prevail and approach this in a level-headed way, we'll get the job done. When we start flying off the handle, not like these, I'm not talking about the 2 people that just spoke, but they have real concerns, and I know they're interested in getting solutions. But when we have a level approach, as opposed to flying off the handle, we will get things done. The state wants this to be done. The county wants it to be done. The residents of Deep Creek Lake and the vacationers and property owners all want it to be done. And keep up the good work, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Brian Greenberg and then Alan Williams.
Thank you. My comments are addressed to the commissioners and to Secretary Griffin and staff from the DNR and MDE, but I especially want to address my fellow citizens who share the same problems I want to discuss today. Secretary Griffin, you noted last year and again today in front of these stakeholders that watershed management is key to effective lake management. We wholeheartedly agree and commend you for this position. And it's important and noteworthy that initial baby steps are being taken in the direction of discussions of watershed management. But, as you know, unlike many other regions, rivers and lakes, Deep Creek Lake lacks a watershed management approach. Instead, we have a fragmented, incomplete, and ineffective lake management system. Referencing the ideal of a watershed management system doesn't change our realities here. The lake is managed to promote recreational use and revenue generation by the state and county. Investments in the lake's regeneration and restoration from the state and the county who benefit from those revenues. A key part, now these are key parts of sustainable management, are effectively absent. Key to a watershed management approach, and I want to suggest to you as you discuss this between the commissioners and the DNR, is engaging citizens and local stakeholders from the top of the watershed on down. The results of this current management approach include sedimentation, shoreline erosion, invasive aquatic plants, deteriorating water quality, and resulting loss of recreational value for residents and visitors. And the core message I think I heard from the DNR and MDE today is that the lake is basically fine. And my core message back to you is that that summary conclusion differs so sharply from the experience of my family and essentially all of the families we know on the lake as to perhaps be from another planet. So the processes we see threaten the amenity, ecological, and economic value of the lake. Along with these losses come risks of declining property values and falling state and county revenue. In short, public and private interests are seriously threatened. Okay, I stop. I take my last moment here to tell you that putting 2,4-D into the lake is a lousy idea. And if you think it's a good idea to put this herbicide into the water, I suggest that you communicate to the County and State Tourism Bureau that they can come and kids and grandkids can marinate in 2,4-D during their vacations at the lake. It will do wonders for tourism on the lake.
Williams, next is Paul Whaley.
Well, Brian's going to be a tough act to follow. I'm Ellen Williams. My family has owned property on the lake since the 1940s. This lake was the best part of my growing up years, here at the lake in the summers. All right. The lake is the best part of my growing up years. It's the place I've chosen to retire to. My 4 children and now my grandchildren are busy building good memories here too. We care deeply about the lake, not as a financial investment, but as the family's home. This is the place my son, who is about to deploy to Afghanistan again, he is here relaxing because this is where he relaxes best in the world. I can tell you it's very hard to be a good steward of the lake, to ensure that it's still here for future generations. I got a letter this summer, my family got a letter this summer, telling us about infractions that we had committed. The letter was seminal for 3 things. It was the first time that I had actually seen a list of things we're not supposed to do on the buffer strip and the easement. There are obvious things we all know about. You can't cut down trees and that kind of thing, but there were things that I didn't know about. I didn't know you couldn't have an outlet or a light within 20 feet of the water. And yet these things have been there for 40 years. The second thing that struck me was the letter itself. It made me feel like a 5-year-old bad girl who had just done something really naughty. And the final thing that bothered me was that it took 2 visits by lake management staff, one to find the infraction and another to come back and confirm that I had fixed it when I said I had fixed it. I don't understand why the Lake Management Office is spending all of their time in land management. That's not helping the lake. Meanwhile, the lake is deteriorating. We know all about the erosion, sediments building up, the invasive species. Boating safety is a big issue. We had a couple of incidents this year in which I or my grandchildren were in the water and a boat cruised by within 15 feet of the person in the water right off our dock. These are all symptoms that, in a policy level, the lake isn't managed effectively. We're not looking at the right things. We need at the right things. It's time to regroup to save the lake. We need a different approach. We need to truly look at this as a watershed, a system. We need programs to deal with these issues, not just to keep studying and studying. We need to start doing. We need resources, almost done, from all those with responsibility and interest in the lake. And finally, we need a new management structure that includes all stakeholders as constructive partners instead of the current dysfunctional and adversarial relationships. We need to work together to be good stewards of the lake.
Whaler, and then Dan Brandt.
My name is Paul Weiler. I've had a home on the lake for 40 years, and I've seen some decline in the lake. I don't live here full-time, but I live here about half the year, maybe a little bit more even, because we love it here. And the grandchildren and children's stories mine are the same as everybody else's, and I won't bore you with them. What I do want to talk to you about is a plan that we discovered, we being Friends of Deep Creek Lake. When the state of Maryland decided to purchase the lake, it developed the Deep Creek Lake Recreation and Land Use Plan as a guide to how to manage and run the lake. And an important part of this was recommendations for lake management and a specific assignment of roles to the DNR, to the Policy and Review Board, and to the county. Okay, so we took a look at this plan, and the plan is made up of 47 specific recommendations broken down into 7 categories, the categories being water quality, adjacent land use, land carrying capacity, visitor access, commercial uses, fish and wildlife management, and management roles and responsibilities, kind of stuff you'd expect to see in this sort of plan. Of those 47 recommendations, we were able to evaluate to some degree or another about 33 of them. So it's not the whole picture, but unfortunately or sadly, the overall assessment we came up with was not particularly good. We evaluated things into 4 categories, scored them from 0 to 4, 0 being nothing was done, 1 being some minimal action, something was done, 2 being some action was taken, more than minimal, 3, some significant action was taken, and then 4, hey, the whole thing got done, was fully satisfied, and that would be great. Unfortunately, the average score across those 7 areas was about 0.56 on this scale of 4. Not very flattering. 1 minute. Thank you. So what I want to ask or suggest is that perhaps the DNR would like to take a look at this plan and do your own assessment. See, do you agree with us? Have we missed something? Can you add something to what we've done? Can we help you? We can provide you the data that we have if you'd like it. We'd like to see your look at you take a look at our data and then come back and say, hey, maybe we can work together to figure out what should be done, what hasn't been done, and what we can do to get a better lake, a better watershed, not lake, watershed management plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan Brandt and then Elizabeth White. You're going to tell me if I'm saying that wrong, aren't you?
I am going to tell you you're saying it's wrong. It's Devin.
Okay.
Sorry. I'm Devin Brandt. And I was asked to come here tonight and share my personal story of how the lake has impacted my life. And also to ask for further and better efforts at restoration that they be made. I've worked at the lake since I was 15 years old, mowing lawns and doing snow and leaf removal with my dad. And before that, he has worked there since he was a kid with his dad. When my dad first had me, he used a lot of the profits from the lake to raise me as a single parent. And then when I got to be 15, I started working with him to save money for college. And in 2010, I got a scholarship to go to Bucknell, but to make the move and to pay for the housing costs, I needed the money that I made from the lake. And if it weren't for the property values of the lake owners that we work for, I don't think I would have been able to afford the education that I have received. And I just want to let you all know that it has been very important to me, and I know there are others out there like me who work at the lake and who are putting other kids through college and making an effort to better themselves, and they're using the lake properties as a way to do that.
Elizabeth White, then Barbara Beeler.
Hi everyone, I'm Elizabeth White. I have lived in Garrett County for all these 22 years. And I've actually been doing some work for the Friends of Deep Creek Lake. And we received a letter from Joanne Marchie. She lives in Crofton, Maryland. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it here tonight, but she did ask us to read this letter for her, so I'm going to read it. To whom it may concern, I am indeed shocked and concerned to learn that Deep Creek Lake is not accorded the same significance as to warrant funding for responsible management of its health and maintenance as the Bay. To be truthful, Deep Creek Lake shares the same level of importance, revenue-wise and recreation-wise, as the Bay, but somehow remains a stepchild in the eyes of our governor and funding, none to be specific, in the budget. This cannot continue to be tolerated, and this petition reflects the concern and desire of tax-paying citizens of Maryland to move the Save Deep Creek Lake to the forefront of Governor O'Malley's agenda for 2013. I have been the owner of a vacation home in Deep Creek Lake for some years now, and I do not want to see my beautiful lake or investment there deteriorate because of neglect or lack of concern. I challenge Governor O'Malley and DNR Secretary Griffin to immediately set forth a plan to begin addressing the state of Deep Creek Lake, not only as a valuable resource of the state, but for its many citizens who live and work and pay taxes in the area. Sincerely, Joanne Marchie.
Thank you. Barbara Beeler, then Jane Avery.
Hi, my name's Barbara Beeler. What hasn't been talked about is the editorials that have recently run in the Republican, and particularly the last editorial, which was an interview between the editor and the secretary of DNR, Mr. Griffin, in which, among other things, he stated clearly that there's no money for Deep Creek Lake from the public, from the state of Maryland, and that there is some of the sections of the lake are so far gone they really can't be restored. We have three issues. Issue one is Maryland. The lake was bought by the state of Maryland. This was a conscious choice, and when they made that conscious choice in 2001, they undertook two things: to manage the lake and to be fiscal, provide the financial resources for that management. That the management principles were clearly stated in the Code of Maryland: protect the natural resource, ensure its ecological balance, and support its highest use as a recreational resource. These are great principles. We are not seeing the management going to do that, and now we're told there isn't any money. The second issue is management. This has been alluded to before. The DNR, when purchased the lake, created lake management and the Policy and Review Board to oversee management and finances. The assumption was the county would be the third active partner, and they would all, quote, coordinate their efforts. A long list of recommendations was made, developed. They're good recommendations. They've been ignored. The third issue is money. Secretary Griffin has stated there is no money for Deep Creek Lake. Let's go back to the buy-down process, which should have been a warning sign for us. We were really stupid to have let that go forward. Maryland sold off most of the existing buffer strip. This was our legacy from Penelec, which has been essential to the health of the lake since it was built in 1925. And we sold most of it off. And what happened to the $13 million? Did it go to the lake? No, it went to the Maryland General Fund. So now we're being told there's no money for the lake. We should have had that $13 million, and it was, as we know, went at rock bottom price. So here we are. I have a cove that has to be dredged. It's going to cost me, if I pay for it, $1 million for my share of getting my part of it done. If anybody wants to buy a property for my property for an extra $1 million, just let me sell you that and the Brooklyn Bridge. Thank you.
Avery, then Mike Ahern.
Mr. Secretary, you scheduled this meeting when most lake stakeholders are not here. You scheduled this meeting during the week when folks with jobs cannot attend. There are hundreds of people impacted, hundreds who would like to express their concerns. They cannot. Over 1,000 of them have signed our petition. So today I represent not only my own voice, but the voices of numerous others who have emailed their feelings to Friends of Deep Creek Lake. Many of the responses were very similar, so to encapsulate them, imagine this whole half of the crowd dressed in 50s clothes with fancy dances, singing, "Save the lake, save 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 the lake." And then the solo guy comes in with a little hat on and he sings, "Governor O'Malley, please, 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 please save the lake. It used to be so pure, but now it's just a sewer, messing up the Gulf of Mexico." "I want to strongly voice my support to save the lake," says one fella. "I've enjoyed it for over 50 years. It's a state treasure that deserves state support." "It's a great treasure, and we can't afford to lose it. How about some stimulus money?" "We are part of Maryland, too. Act now before it's too late and costs 5 times as much to reclaim a living lake." "We are aware of the Save the Bay initiative, the importance of the natural environment conservation at the shore, and feel that it is very important for the government of the state of Maryland to support environmental remediation statewide, not just on the Eastern Shore area. Save the lake, we are part of Maryland too. I grew up sailing on Deep Creek Lake and am dismayed how fast this invasive vegetation is taking over the lake. As a small business owner who builds Flying Scot sailboats, I urge the state of Maryland to get involved in restoring the lake to the beautiful condition I remember. When we purchased our lake property in 1992, well, we were able to keep our boat in the water until Labor Day. But for the past 5 years, we've had to take our boats out sooner. The last 2 years, the boats had to come out by the middle of August. Unfortunately, I have to sell this lake property and haven't had any offers for the past 2 years because of the level of the lake in our cove on Green Glade. The cove is a wonderful location for children, but it is becoming unusable. Please save the lake for us and for the future. We here on Hazelhurst had to push the dock out 40 yards this year. Save the lake. It's Western Maryland's treasure. Every bit as important to us as the Bay is to Central Maryland and as Ocean City is to the Eastern Shore. The Bay and the Ocean City have benefited greatly from your efforts. Our lake can be saved if you take action now. My final comment is my own. And I'm simply going to state that for over 60 years, I've loved swimming in Deep Creek Lake. And now, I don't.
Mike Ahern, then Ralph Schmidt.
Wow. We got to get this on YouTube. It'll go viral. Mr. Secretary, Commissioners, Mr. Yule. My name is Michael Ahern. I'm here to discuss the political ramifications of the lake situation. Good news is Friends of Deep Creek Lake released a newsletter just yesterday, I think, or very recently, that said there's cause for optimism, anticipating some of your remarks here today. And certainly your work during the recent storm and the governors and the rest of the county and state things, all that's, appreciated. However, with respect to the rest of your remarks, they were filled with inconsistencies and barren of any sense of urgency or any source of funding to correct any of these problems. You mentioned you're studying and studying and studying. All right? I've lived here for 4 years or so. In that time, I've observed the heartbreaking deterioration of the lake. And we all know what it's been due to: the low water levels, the high temperatures, the fish kills in the thousands, the milfoils entangling swimmers and sailboats, erosion of the lakefront, and sediment clogging the lake bottom. We all know that. Terrible problems are a result, at the very least, of mismanagement. And at worst, gross negligence, I think, when you think of what this place was like, since we started coming up 20 years ago. Let me direct the rest of my comments to you, Mr. Yule, in the hope that they'll be redirected to the governor. Over a year ago, Secretary Griffin's here on the inspection floor, came to the conclusion, and as much as said, that there are serious problems here with all of the above-named situations. More recently, he observed that portions of the lake were likely unrecoverable. Now his position, and policy, I guess, is that even after moving further down the road of this terrible situation, there's no state money available for restoration due to the so-called recession, even though the GDP has been growing for at least the last 2 years and is expected to grow, another point or two over the next couple. Recession is defined as a retraction of the economy. That's not what's happened in the last couple of years. So don't blame everything, on a recession, Mr. Secretary. And he suggested that the lake owners themselves fund the restoration. Okay, two seconds. The Maryland owns the lake, okay, not the homeowners, okay? So I don't know where this comes from that the homeowners should fund all the restoration. Last comment is this all should be treated not necessarily as a political situation or certainly not an economic situation. This is a moral obligation we have to our children and our grandchildren to preserve our natural resources. That's not being done. It hasn't been done for the last 4 years since I've been here. And, the sense of urgency has to happen, and the funding has to happen. Thank you.
Ralph Schmidt and Charles Hominitz.
Secretary Griffin,
and your staff and our county commissioners and everybody here today. I have voiced my opinion several times in letters to the editor and public forum. And I'd like to state right now, finally, the Republican newspaper and Friends of Deep Creek Lake have voiced a very strong advocacy for taking a stand that the state of Maryland must accept responsibility for the welfare and preservation of Deep Creek Lake. Republican writing 5 editorials regarding the deterioration of the lake, Friends of Deep Creek Lake currently circulating a petition to the state to provide state funds toward preservation of the lake and surrounding watershed. It is my understanding that they have now over 1,000 signed petitions. I have voiced my own advocacy in letters over the years. It is my understanding that Ocean City receives Maryland state tax money of $500,000 a year to replace and replenish sand from erosion and to protect Ocean City due to storm temp. Why is not the state providing funds to protect Deep Creek Lake? Why are the lake access and lakefront property owners paying for the total cost of the DNR and the Lake Management Office in dock fees under Penelic that was $10 a year, and now in our association is $144? Why do lake access and front property owners have to pay for the total upkeep of the DNR buffer strip, including protecting the lake shore line from erosion and controlling state and county road storm runoff that affects our own private property as well as the buffer strip? Where are the commissioners and the Maryland elected delegate and senator in lobbying for state funds to protect Deep Creek Lake as is done with Ocean City? Now is the time for the commissioners to put forth funds to protect Deep Creek Lake and the watershed. Now is the time for Garrett County State Delegate and Senator to put forth an appropriation bill in 2013 to get state funds to protect and preserve state-owned property. Deep Creek Lake. It is time for all of the flush taxes that be allocated toward the preservation of Deep Creek Lake and not the bay. Okay.
Charles Hoffeditz, then Jess Whittemore.
Good evening. My name is Chuck Hoffeditz. I have a simple question, and it's in regard to dredging. A few years ago at New Germany State Park, there was a proposal to dredge the lake there. Did that money come from the state?
Jess Whittemore, then Max Peterson.
Secretary, commissioners, everybody else. My name is Jess Whittemore, and I'm a councilman for the town of Friendsville. And my comments aren't necessarily popular with this particular crowd, but we're on the other side of the mountain. We get the water from the lake that the dam releases. And we're a designated stakeholder in the lake, as designated by Maryland Department of Environment. We've been going to their stakeholder meetings for decades. And, you know, we're real happy with Maryland Department of Environment's involvement in lake water level. And that's, the town of Friendsville, of course, sympathizes with lake property owners when it comes to sediment and SAVs. But I will tell you this, Secretary, when people want the lake to stay high, that takes away what Friendsville has come to develop around. we're developing our town around the dam releases. I believe we get pretty much 66 dam releases a year if the drought season doesn't come in. And we have businesses that are created around it. They're becoming more and more dependent on those dam releases. 66 days of river opportunity are not much, but it's what we have. And we're a small municipality. I just wanted to come here today and throw my little piece of the mix into your consideration. I will make the observation aware to you that your Policy and Review Board has got many different stakeholders on it, but nobody other than Maryland Fisheries that's on the other side of the mountain. Nobody that's a stakeholder in the dam releases. And I think it's fair to you that you might consider having somebody help you with you. You have a subcommittee called the Lake Water Level Subcommittee and on the PRB, and I just wanted to let you know that we're aware of it and that they don't have the input that I think is fairly necessary for you to make considerations. That's it. Thank you for your time.
Max Peterson, then Alan Nixon.
Commissioner and ladies and gentlemen, my name is Max Peterson. I'm a relative newcomer to the lake. I moved up here and live here full-time since 2005. When I bought my dock and boat, there was no noxious weed at the end of it. 6 years later, I was surprised this fall to note that noxious weed growing at the end of my dock, and I know it's because it's picked up on the propeller or whatever and brought. The point that I'd like to make is I'd like to ask you to re-examine the weevil. The studies that I've done on the internet, and I realize not everything is true on the internet, seem to indicate it's a North American species. I did hear that it's considered invasive to Maryland, but I'd like to request that you folks re-examine that again. It seems like a relatively simple fix to the problem. You could do it now and move on. And finally, I support saving the bay. It's good. But there are a number of states other than Maryland that are stakeholders in that should be brought into the fold. Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, New York. And this is tongue-in-cheek, of course, let's build a dam where the Susquehanna is and let them deal with the problem up there. Seriously, we should find a way to include them in the tax base. Already has been mentioned beach replenishment. Some of that money ought to really come back to Deep Creek. We're all state taxpayers, and I appreciate your coming up here, and thank you for your attention.
Alan Nixon, then Bill and Marie Alsop.
My questions have been addressed, and I appreciate being able to attend this meeting and get the information. Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you. Bill and Marie.
Hello, Secretary Griffin.
Good evening.
Thank you for coming. Oh. In 1946, my daddy built our cabin. And I've been on the lake. I'm sorry, I get emotional. I've been on the lake. As a little girl, I would go out in the water, jump in the water. And it was beautiful, it was clear, it was crisp. And my brother and I'd stay in the water till our lips turned blue, my hands shriveled up. I still love to go to the lake. I still love it. But I won't go in the water. It's horrible. It's full of weeds. It's invasive stuff in there. And I just get so emotional because this is my lake. Please help us. I'm sorry.
Mr. Secretary, Commissioners, I have one question that I would like to ask relative to the issues we've dealt with here today. We talk about water level, and now that Maryland has always owned the water, now that they've purchased the land, why is it we are not controlling our water level through these critical periods during the summer? If the MDE needs to take a look at the permit that they have struck with Bloomfield, it would seem to me when it drops below the rule bands during the critical periods of the summer, July, August, and September, that we would put a plug in this. With all due respect to our folks down in Friendsville, we are the ones that are suffering when it goes below the rule band, and we slough it off to the fact that Bloomberg controls that. We need to step up, take care of this, and put a plug in this lake.
Howard Janoski, then David Schelling.
Mr. Secretary, Commissioners, my name's Howard Janoski. That property is 789 Penn Point Road, better known as Pond Run Cove. Mr. Secretary, I think we talk about dredging in Pond Run Cove. I think it's excavating. There is no water in Pond Run Cove. You need to clarify that in your studies. You can bring them in. You don't need a boat. Any bulldozer will do it. Believe me. I have pictures. I'm sorry to say most of my docks and most of the advertisements you see is what is wrong with Deep Creek Lake. I'm not here to criticize DNR. I'm here for some recommendations. Like the gentleman before me, I think we need to take a look at that study and the release of water that's leaving Deep Creek Lake. As the gentleman who worked for DNR said, we have changing climates, changing rainfall, and it seems like the temperatures are rising. I think we need to take a look at those charts once again and look at the flow levels, just like the gentleman before me stated, and make sure that in September that we have enough water in the lake to float the boats in Pond Run. Number one, our autumn glory is one of our largest revenuing in the county. At the end of August and September, I had no water in my dock whatsoever. How can I rent a cabin or a lodge on Deep Creek Lake with no water at the pier? The commissioners realize this. They know it is a cash cow with the people coming up here. We need your help. I apologize that our representatives are not here, our delegate or our senator. I understand they needed to be in Annapolis. But it's very important that we relook these things over. Also, when we do this dredging, we're going to have more water in the lake. More water in the lake is going to be more turbines. We're looking at green energy. I think possibly with your people, you could go back to the federal government and say, we can produce more energy, more electricity by dredging and getting more water to go through the turbine. I don't know if anyone's ever looked at that, but there should be some federal funds available. I thank you for your time and your consideration. Thank you, sir.
David Schelling, then Barbara Stork. David Schelling, then Barbara Stork.
Secretary Griffin, Commissioner. My comments today basically involve the bedload movement or the runoff coming and silting up the lake. I have two suggestions that would I think improve the comprehensiveness of a plan. I spent 30 years as a professor at Maryland, most of that time as a consultant to the state of Maryland, specifically for the State Highway Administration. Part of that was the policy on runoffs as Agnes, 100-year storm versus a 20-year storm. And since that time, and my time up here, I've walked the lake. I'm having more difficulty today walking, but, and I've noticed that the runoff coefficients have changed. So my comments to the hydrologist here is you have to be modeling what's happening around the lake, specifically the road system in Garrett County, which is under control of the county itself. The runoff coming off the roadway into the receiving waters is, I think, part of the problem on the silt buildup. That's why it's so turgid down the line into the lake itself. It used to be clear, now it's muddy after every storm. And the type of material used rather than salt, I don't know what that plays, but I think that calcium has screwed up our lodge. The wood is not the same. Everything is gray. I don't know what the answer is to that, but it's also the amount of material put on the roads. The circumferential roads around the lake are significant in the amount of runoff coming into the lake. And also the small streams coming into the lake from the runoff is completely different than it was when we first moved up here in the 80s. It's not permeable in that it's going to the groundwater and aquifers. It's going around into the lake. There's more, runoff coefficients are higher, and you can see that runoff go in. I'm pleased to see that you have gauging stations, but that's not the answer necessarily, because those are large software for TR20, the large software runoff hydrology and hydrographs. I think you need a small watershed area, one by one, all around the lake to look at exactly what's happening. There's one resource you might want to look into. The Department of Civil Engineering has a resource called the Remote Sensing Center. Dr. Reagan started that. It's been very successful. It's a satellite-based system, and it does give you a lot of detail on a real-time basis. That may be one area. The last area I'd like to talk about is the speed of the boats. The boats are getting faster and faster, and closer and closer to the docks, and there's more erosion coming along the shore. That to me means nothing but erosion and more bed load going into the coves when it participates out. So my comments are all technical, but I think they're important in that the silting seems to be a real problem on this lake. And I think you have to take a high detailed analysis of a comprehensive plan on the lake.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Barbara Stork and Ted Gristle.
Yes, my name's Barbara Stork. I'm Skippers Point Road. And a lot of the comments have been made here. We all know of the erosion, the sediment, the grasses, the goose poop. We all know about all those things. But I want to tell and I appreciate the commissioners and the secretary coming here and know we have a problem now. But are they really going to do anything about the problem? That's the question. You have wonderful neighbors that don't own the lake, but we go by all the rules you make for the lake. You have a wonderful neighbor in me. I had 2 enormous trees go down in this storm, which many of you have. And DNR came and said I can take them out, which is good because it'll impede my dock if I don't. But it's going to cost me $2,000. So I don't know. I mean, we're helping you guys maintain this area, but we have to go by everything you mandate. It has to be channels upon channels upon channels. We know a lot of us want to do erosion walls, but you want permits of $1,500 even to look at our erosion walls to help. I mean, if I had a neighbor that would help me, I'd be sure calling upon him and treating him pretty nice. I mean, we all know we pay lots of taxes here, and we help you there. We're helping the Bay. Is the Bay people going to help us when our lakes are sore like theirs is? All of us have an investment here. Every one of us here. You have an investment in your home. You have investment in your memories. You have an investment with us here as commissioners and your economic value. You've got to get on top of this stuff. We all know this. We're speaking, this little people here, we got a lot of people here for a Wednesday at 4 o'clock in November. I mean, get these people in the summer. This place, you couldn't even have a hole big enough to hold these people that have these concerns but can't be here. So we who are speaking today are speaking for much and many more. And lastly, I do appreciate you coming here. I think you're getting on top of it, but you're not getting it quick enough. We all know that this didn't happen overnight. I've written letters to commissioners long before you guys. As soon as they saw my name, they went in the trash can. So, I mean, I've tried to tell people the goose is going to die. The poop will be here, but the goose with the golden egg is going to die. So don't kill the goose. Get the goose healthy, that we can all continue on with what we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Ted Russell, then Judy Fang.
Okay, there's not a whole lot new to say. I would say there was a little bit of good news. 10, 15 years ago, these gentlemen would not have been here. I'm not sure they knew where Deep Creek Lake was 10 or 15 years ago. So at least they're here, they're thinking about it. Part of the problem is they're thinking about it and studying and not doing a whole lot. Someone mentioned about the Lake Management Office. They don't manage the lake, they manage the buffer strip. We need somebody to manage the lake and the watershed. The erosion, the erosion on the shoreline, this lady just mentioned it. We pay hundreds of dollars to get the DNR to say we can do something to save their land. And the tree, I've got a big tree down. I'm going to have to pay the DNR $50 or $100 so they can tell me I can chop it up and haul it away at my expense. It's their tree. I don't expect them to pay for it, but I think they ought to let me do it with not charging. A friend of mine went up to Lake Chautauqua to take his Flying Scot. Took him half an hour to get through the weed, and that's a big lake. And there were machines out there chopping it up. Of course, when you chop it up, you spread it. I'd like to second the thing about the milfoil weevils. And where do we get the money? Well, all of us here know that 2/3 and probably 80 or 90% of the people in Garrett County drain to the west. So we ought to get that flush tax back here in Garrett County, and that would sure pay for a lot of work that needs to be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Judy.
My name is Judy Fang. I have spoken at last year's meeting. I wasn't sure what I wanted to say, but I really think that if the state of Maryland and the Maryland DNR cannot find a way to properly manage this lake and make the investment in it and stop using it as a cash cow, they should find a way to turn it over to us and let us own it and manage it. One of the reasons that there are a lot of people that have second homes up here who you've made meeting after meeting that they cannot attend, the reason they can afford a second home is either they've successfully managed to build a business or they've managed to be paid a lot of money to successfully manage somebody else's business. To sit in these meetings and be treated like the village idiot is beyond infuriating. To go to a local fundraiser and listen to everybody else referring to the DNR as the local Nazis, or they are referred to as the DNR Nazis, is disgusting. This lake has been so poorly managed. I have offered to take Bruce Michaels out on my boat when we discovered the horror of the Eurasian water milfoil. The same invitations have been made to all of you, the commissioners have gone out, Don Sinsel has gone out. The science that's being conducted is bad, plain bad. If you know anything about science or protocols, it's a joke. There has not been one of you that has been willing to go out and make an empirical eyeballing of the actual problems on the lake. Looking at Eurasian water milfoil with divers who go out after the die-off of that particular grass is such a waste of money. We're tired of paying to keep your scientific staff studying the bay with our tax money and not getting anything in return. The time has come to either, as they say, you know what, but unfortunately every time we do it, we go to support the bay and not ourselves. So, please.
That's it, Ms. Secretary. Would you like to conclude the meeting?
When you do this, I learned you hold the mic like a roll of toilet paper. I, again, appreciate everyone coming. I think what we're going to do as best as we could with notes we took from people's testimony is do a more thorough piece of commentary back to all of you, because in the little bit of time I have, it's going to be very hard to respond to every issue that's been raised here, so we'll do that. We were talking to commissioners earlier about this. The reason that we do this session in November, which I admit is when a lot of people are not at the lake, that wasn't by design. It's just that's when we finish up most of our yearly monitoring, so we come up here. But I think what we talked about earlier, and I think what we'll do is perhaps come up and do updates perhaps in July when most people are here, have another meeting in an appropriate location. In this particular case, by next July, a lot of some of the additional work will be completed, so we'll have more to share. And so perhaps we'll do, a late fall meeting and then one in July when most lake property owners and vacationers are here, so everybody can not only give us feedback, but also we can reach a larger audience. I guess I'd like to offer a few general comments. You've heard the phrase, I'm sure everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but not their own facts. I understand, as I've gotten into this again, that there are some unique issues with people who own properties in the coves. And we are trying our best to work through those, whether it's lake grasses, whether it's sedimentation buildup, whether it's lake levels that particularly impact people in the coves. But to turn around and say that those issues are pervasive throughout the lake is a fact that simply is not true. Because most of the lake, with all due respect to those who think we don't have good scientists, we don't do proper methodology, for example, we did the survey of bay grass, of lake grasses, including Eurasian milfoil, in early July. So it wasn't after all the lake grasses had died off. All lakes change. This is not the same lake that it was, as many of you described it in glowing and emotional terms years and years ago. Everything in nature is constantly changing, including Deep Creek Lake. We are still relatively in a very good position in terms of the overall water quality of the lake. And you don't have to be a PhD to understand what's happened over time in the watershed. Look around you, look at the lake. To correct a few comments that were made about my discussion with the editor of your local newspaper, The Republican, I did not say, and I just reread the editorial based on a conversation you had with me, that the department or the state or the governor was writing off areas of the lake. That's the sort of hyperbole that becomes tiresome, very tiresome. What I said was, in response to a question, we have a dedicated fund, the Waterway Improvement Fund. It's funded by the sales tax on boat sales in the state. Because of the recession, our revenues are down about 50%. That's just a fact. I mean, I'm not making it up, that's a fact. People who buy boats tend to purchase them, particularly the larger ones, by taking out second mortgages on their homes. You remember when the recession started back in 2008, I think, you remember, that lending dried up, second mortgages dried up substantially. They're starting to come back, but the boat industry in Maryland has not really bounced back significantly, so our revenues are way down. And those are the revenues that we use to do access to the lake, like launching ramps, to dredge, to do a number of things. And in rural areas of the state, I'm sure you all know this, but in a gross sense, because of your population base being less than in the large metropolitan areas, tax revenues that go to the state, in the case of Garrett County, are less than what you get back in funding. That's not to say that you shouldn't advocate for more. That's your right as a citizen of the state to advocate for what you feel you need. Any area of the state that's less popular, like your county, always gets more back in expenditures than you generate in revenues.
Do they go to the lake? Really?
No, they don't go to the lake. They go to the general fund, with exceptions of certain tax and fee revenues that come to our department.
What about a credit for all our buy-down funds that went to the general revenue?
Well, again, I'm just giving you some comments back. I'm not.
You get a lot from us too. You weren't very good stewards of that 13 million. That's right.
Let me continue. I'm not going to debate this issue with you now. References have been made to we won't dredge the coves. Now, those people who own property in the coves, I assume, realized when they purchased those lots, which were perhaps, I don't know, less in value than homes on other parts of the lake because they were in coves, are concerned about all of this. Let me tell you, with the Waterway Improvement Fund, for all the dredging we do as a general rule, if you think about this in terms of the expenditure of public dollars to benefit the boating public, we dredge and we pay for major boating channels when we have the funding, which we don't have now. We pay for 100% for major boating channels that are used by the general boating public. We do not do that for spurs and coves throughout the bay and all its tributaries. When we have revenue, what we do is provide greatly subsidized loans to local governments who then enlist the support of people who own property along spurs or coves to pay off the cost of dredging them. That's been the policy of the state for years, because once you go beyond that and start deciding which group of property owners who are not part of who don't live on a general boating channel or benefit from it, then number one, you have far more need than you can ever possibly accommodate. And then you get into questions, well, why are you benefiting this group of property owners versus this group over there, particularly when you can't benefit them all of them. Pardon me?
You're benefiting your lake?
Correct. We also own, the state owns the waters under the Chesapeake Bay and all of its tributaries. Several people again mentioned Ocean City. We don't put $500,000 a year into a maintenance fund for periodic replenishment. We put $1 million a year. But that's matched by another $1 million by the City of Ocean City and Worcester County, the county within which it's located. So that's basically a 50-50 match. The federal government puts their share in. We are trying our best to work through these issues. I think we have had much improved conversations and cooperation with this Board of County Commissioners. I want to give them credit for that. And more things are going to start to happen as we move forward. I would only urge all of you to think about the following. As long as people up here are divided as stakeholders, we will not achieve any of the goals that we need to hammer out. As long as all of you are divided, pitting people in Friendville against lakefront property owners versus fishermen and all that.
Minute problem. There's no division generally about whether we want the lake to survive.
I'm not talking about that, but I was up here last year and there was a lot more debate among various beneficiaries of the release of water from the lake, not as much this year. All I'm trying to say is, and it's up to all of you, but in my considerable experience in government, if you want to get things done, if you want to move the ball down the field, if you want to you need to have consensus, and you need to tone down the rhetoric and start working constructively with one another and with government, both here and at the county level, to see what we can develop. Pardon me?
And vice versa. You need to up your rhetoric, down your studies, and work with us.
Sense of urgency.
Right. As someone suggested, we can stop, believe me. We've been cutting our budgets every year, cutting them, not adding to them. If you don't want us to do this comprehensive monitoring program, which we thought was a good idea, when I came back to this department, just tell us and we will stop doing it. If you don't want us to do any of this work, we'll stop doing it. If you want us to turn the lake back to the county, or as someone suggested, to the property owners, what do you mean it's not right? But that's what you were saying.
We're saying action is better than studies. We're not saying studies are bad. We're saying a sense of urgency and some real action on solving the problem.
Sir,
Yes.
state government, local government in this state, revenues are way down. They're way down. Pardon me?
Let's talk about priorities. Where are you spending all the money?
Pardon me?
Where's all the money going that you have? I mean, it's a sense of priority.
We have
Since
the.
It's not revenue. It's not money. It's priorities.
I'm starting to argue with you, and I apologize. I don't mean to do that.
You do.
The only thing I'm trying to say is we're trying our best to work with your local government, with your delegation in Annapolis, and listening to all of you to try to develop a consensus, because if we have a consensus over where we want to go with the lake, it's much more likely that funding will happen. As long as we are in the midst of a lot of these debates, I'm not saying healthy debate isn't good, but as long as we continue in this fashion, we're not going to get to a point where securing funding.
Let's just make the commitment to move forward. That's all we're asking.
That's what we're doing. That's what we're trying to do.
I think that was stated in a recent campaign not too long ago.
Right. Well, anyway, I'm voicing my frustration. You have it. We're not potted plants in government. We also have frustrations. We're doing our best. Obviously, many of you don't think we're doing enough. That's fair. That's your right as a citizen to say that and to press for more action. I understand that. But I'm just urging all of you to try to come together with us and with the county government and see what we can do together, because there is a lot of competition for funding. It's not a period of great excess revenues in state government or local government. So the more we coalesce, the better chance we have together securing funding at all levels of government to help move the lake forward.
John, are you going to commit to a mechanism that would bring all of us together? We've been trying to do this for years. We would love to come together with you and talk about this, and the county commissioners would be a major breakthrough. It has been very difficult to get the DNRs here, and with all due respect to county commissioners here, with your leadership, you can put in place a watershed management mechanism which would recruit all of us stakeholders to identify a consensus area, not unanimity. We will never reach unanimity given all the divergent interests. We have a consensus. It's a red herring to suggest that the lack of complete unanimity is the problem here. It's the lack of a management mechanism.
I don't think I used the word unanimity, but I said it general consensus. You're never going to get 100% of anything.
I'd like to say one thing. Mike Lewis, I'm principal of the Department of Juvenile Services.
Hi, Mike. Good to see you.
We've got a wonderful partnership with DNR. We've gone from raising 350 fish for stocking initiatives to now over 10,000 fish in cooperation with DNR to populate our local streams, Savage River, every community fishing rodeo for our kids, or fish that we've run. I mean, it's out there, but it's not easy. I mean, and you've got to be able to, you know, we sit here and say one thing, but the action's in Annapolis. You know, you got to get out and develop those kind of partnerships and be able to work. And we've just had a tremendous experience, and it just continues to grow. I think the lake, I've been on the lake all my life. We've been there. But it is changing. There are things that we can do as we come together. But we have a great partner. It's a great model to follow. I admire your courage for coming up because you had to know you were going to get 22.
I don't, that's part of my job. I don't think it's part of the job of people who work with us.
Everyone in this room wants one thing. They want the lake to be good.
Right, and all I'm trying to say to you is there's some localized issues, particularly in the coves.
Some of us talk out of frustration because we've been trying for so long. I don't even go to proper hearing meetings anymore.
Right.
I'm surprised I came tonight because it's like, what are you talking
Right.
for?
Right. Let me just sum up. A, we'll do a follow-up commenting on a number of things I didn't comment on, and we'll send it to the commissioners and send it to the PRB and the Property Owners Association and others, and we'll let it, you know, have it posted on websites so you can look at our response to some of the specific issues. Secondly, we'll plan on coming up here twice a year, and we'll come up next July, and we'll repeat that when most of the folks are up here recreating in the summer for the reasons I stated. And thirdly, we're going to continue to have discussions with the commissioners about how we move to a broader lake management plan that does involve stakeholders and other related issues. So I think by things are just going to start to unfold at a little more rapid pace. All I'm trying to say to you on funding is that we're still trying to dig out of a hole at the state level. There's light at the end of the tunnel. We have expended more waterway improvement funds up here. Some of you know this, perhaps some of you don't, than the revenue that we've gotten that goes into the fund, as I was mentioning earlier. I'm not saying it's enough, but the proportion of what we send back here for projects is greater than what we get from Garrett County. And that's going to be true generally speaking. So that's enough. I'm sorry if I got a little frustrated, but we're people too.
That concludes. The commissioners will be here. Secretary Griffin, I know, has to leave, but the commissioners will be here if you have comments for us.